The lesson today is the first part of the story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead, which I'll read first. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness is not unto death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by means of it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, Let us go into Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were but now seeking to stone you, and you are going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. Thus he spoke, and then he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him from sleep. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary sat in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, he who is coming to the world. Well, we're not in Bethany across the Jordan any longer, where Jesus was baptized. The township Bethany is just east of Jerusalem, and Jesus leaves one Bethany, where he was baptized, for another. He goes from comparative safety, having escaped being stoned, to comparative peril. The event seems to take place between the dedication of the temple and Passover, and it's something that people, when reading the scriptures early on, would have noticed, that we tend not to these days, is that the name Lazarus means God helps. Lazarus is not a big player in the gospel. Thus far, he's only a certain man. But God helps him just as much as anyone else. Jesus knows this family of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Jesus, as fully human, experienced the pleasures of friendship and also the pain that friendship can bring about when a friend dies. These are not just ordinary folks Jesus happens to know. The family of Mary, Martha and Lazarus are clearly disciples of Jesus. They believe that he is the Messiah. The illness is not one that will bring Lazarus to the second death, only to the first death. Jesus takes his time, not out of cruelty or indifference, but because he's not one to be prompted by human wishes. He abides in his own time, one that's consonant with the proper time for him to come to the cross. So all of his events in the Gospel of John are established as to the right time for him to undergo the passion and be lifted up and give glory to the Father. And this raising of Lazarus will be the last and greatest sign of his divinity in the Gospel of John. It will also precipitate the final movement against him, so that he'll be glorified, first of all by the raising of Lazarus, and then, more importantly, by his own death and resurrection. So the raising of Lazarus prefigures his own death and resurrection. The irony is that the raising of a friend to life brings about Jesus' own death, and such, we remember, is the lot of the noble shepherd. Jesus seems to allow Lazarus to die just so that he may raise him from the dead. But the glory of God is in the joint activity of Jesus and the Father. Now you'll notice that John doesn't mention the raising of the widow's son at Nain or the raising of Jairus' daughter, which are both in the synoptic tradition. And that's because he wishes to focus all his attention on this dramatic story, the raising of Lazarus from the dead. On the other hand, we might say that the historicity of the raising of Lazarus, because it's not in any of the other Gospels, gains some support in the synoptic testimony that Jesus has raised others from the dead. We're told again, in case we might forget, that the emphasis in the story is on the full humanity of Jesus, as well as upon his divine powers. He loves the family of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. When he stays 2 days longer in the place where he was, Jesus seems to be ensuring that Lazarus will be dead by the time he comes to Bethany. And then he says to his disciples, let's go to Judea again. Notice that he doesn't say, let's go to Bethany, but Judea. He chooses the word that indicates the maximum degree of hostility to him as the Messiah, pointing out that this is going to be the decisive moment for his final run-in with the Jewish and Roman authorities. So Jesus is putting himself in mortal danger, as his disciples and he well know. The time is not simply chronological. It's not a matter of there being 12 hours in the day. It's what we might call Christian time, the time in which one may act for the glorification of God and for the salvation of the world. Jesus is himself the light of the world. Of course, Jesus says to the disciples, Lazarus is sleeping. And the disciples, in a characteristic misunderstanding, think that he's merely asleep and therefore getting better. So Jesus has to point out to them that Lazarus is actually dead. And the act he's about to perform is one which will increase the faith of the disciples, which is needed precisely because he knows he's going to his sacrificial death, and he knows all that they will suffer after his death, so their faith needs to be bolstered as much as possible by this miracle. It's touching that Thomas says to his disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. They're fully cognizant of the dangers of going into Judea. Thomas, the word Thomas, means twin. In the Middle Ages, it was thought that Thomas was Jesus' twin. Have a look one day at the Acts of Thomas, which are not part of the canon of the Bible, but which follow this emphasis on Jesus Christianity, which is played out in India. Jesus, the noble shepherd, is prepared to die for one of his sheep. He goes into Judea, places himself into acute danger, where the chances are that he won't really return. When he arrives, Lazarus has been in the tomb 4 days, and the detail is important. In the Holy Land, at the time, one was put into the tomb on the day one died. The heat, the conditions, made it dangerous simply to keep a corpse in a house. And it was believed that the soul of the departed stayed with the corpse for 3 days, and then went into the afterlife. So the detail of being dead for 4 days means that Lazarus' soul would have been assumed to have departed, no longer near the body. In other words, he was completely dead. And this is more important, perhaps, than the fact that the corpse is beginning to smell. Martha comes out to meet him. And it's highly unusual in the culture of the day for Martha, or anyone, to leave the house which is in a state of mourning. The convention was to stay in the house and visit only the tomb, and of course be the host of those people who come to console them, as happens. But Martha goes out to meet Jesus and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha has a vivid awareness that Jesus radiates the power of life in his very person, and has supreme confidence in him. She is confident of the intimacy shared by Yahweh and Jesus. And Jesus says to her, comfortingly, "Your brother will rise again." But in terms of the story, this statement is ambiguous. Lazarus will rise at the last day, but also Lazarus will be raised from the dead today. He will be raised from the dead, and he will die again another time, and then be raised up at the last day. And of course Martha, being a follower of Jesus, believes this. Among the Pharisees even, it was believed that there was the resurrection of the dead at the last day. It was only the Sadducees who denied the resurrection. Jesus, who is close to the Pharisees in certain respects, says in this astonishing statement, "I am the resurrection and the life." This is another of those "I am" statements that I've been remarking on, that show Jesus shares in Yahweh's power. His power is such that he can bring the general resurrection forward into the present for a particular reason. And he's giving the meaning of the event before the fact, whereas what he usually does is give the meaning of the event or parable after the fact. To believe in Jesus, as the story it revolves around the act of believing in Jesus, what does that mean? It means that one believes in him as one's deliverer from sin, and hence from the power of death. Martha does have that belief, but her belief is less in what Jesus says as a kind of theological remark than in him as the Christ, that all power, all life, all Zoe abides in the person of Jesus as the true Christ, as the true Messiah. We'll continue with this story later, but this brings us exactly halfway through the Gospel of John, 31 lessons, and we get halfway. So I think we're looking at something like 62 lessons or thereabouts for the whole Gospel of John.